All right, here is our talk on cell energy, the process of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And here we go. So homeostasis, super important word in everything that we're learning this year. Plants maintain balance. So homeostasis is maintaining balance in a system. The system we're talking about, again, is inside a plant. And we know that plants need sunlight and water and carbon dioxide to live. They get that through the process of phototropism, where they actually turn towards the light, and gravitropism, where they turn in response to gravity. So two kind of magical things, which we can explain in detail if you want, but the way that the cells react to the heat of the light or to density in the soil, they can respond to light and gravity, and then in both cases get the things they need to grow. Okay, plants also maintain homeostasis by the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So plants are producers, they make their own energy. They're also autotrophs, they eat their own energy. And that relationship of producing their food and making their own food actually makes a really nice cycle of nutrient recycling and then energy production. You need to know the photosynthesis equation and you need to know the cellular respiration equation. So I would pause the slides and write this down. So carbon dioxide and water with the energy of the sun makes glucose and oxygen. When we, as a heterotroph, eat the food from a plant, so we're eating the glucose, we breathe in the oxygen that plants gave us. So we take glucose and oxygen, we do a reaction called respiration. We release carbon dioxide, we also release water, and then it makes ATP, which is a usable form of energy for our cells. So this relationship of these two is how all organisms on the world or in the world get energy, but it's also how plants make their own energy. And I will explain that in just a minute. So plants do photosynthesis, sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water to produce oxygen and glucose, and that makes that stored food form of energy. And it happens right here inside the plant cells in an organelle called a chloroplast. Well, that energy from the chloroplast, or that glucose, will swim right over to another organelle in the cell of the plant, and the plant will use that glucose to turn it into that usable form of energy called ATP. So plant cells do photosynthesis right here to make the glucose. They use that glucose and turn it into a usable form of energy called ATP. So they produce their food and then they autotroph, or they self-eat right here and turn it into energy for the rest of their cell. So let's look at it one more time. Photosynthesis, again, it happens in an organelle called a chloroplast in a plant cell. So they produce the energy here, and there's a bunch of chloroplast in this cell, and they always have all these little lines in them. They kind of look like beans with a bunch of little lines in them. Those little lines are because of these stacks called thylakoid membranes. Those thylakoids are full of a chemical called chlorophyll. So chlorophyll makes the chloroplast green. So here's that thylakoid membrane again. When light comes into a plant, the light is actually absorbed by that chlorophyll inside the chloroplast. So this whole thing is the chloroplast. Chlorophyll is the chemical inside these green discs, and that chlorophyll absorbs actually all of the spectrum of the rainbow except green. So plants look green because the light is reflected off. Whatever you see, if you're looking at something that's red, the reason something is red is because red is reflected and all the other colors of the spectrum are absorbed. Plants look green because green is reflected. All the other colors of that rainbow are actually used to do photosynthesis. So it's the opposite of the way we think. Plants are green because they don't like green. They like all the other colors of the rainbow. It is autumn right now, so we are in the process of chlorophyll actually breaking down. What happens in the fall is as daylight gets less, and there's usually less water because it becomes a drier season, plants can't do photosynthesis. When they can't do photosynthesis, the chlorophyll actually starts to break down. When chlorophyll breaks down, the leaves are no longer green, and they show up whatever color is left in their tissues. You might have noticed that there are plants called evergreens. They stay green all winter, and their needles are long and skinny. So the reason evergreens can stay green all winter is they don't lose as much water through their stomata. They don't dry out as fast, so they actually are able to keep on doing photosynthesis. So these kinds of leaves, because water gets less and daylight hours are shorter, they break down the chlorophyll and they don't do photosynthesis anymore. The tree kind of hibernates over the winter. Okay, you don't need to know this, but I want you to respect the process of photosynthesis. It is a super complicated reaction. Part of the reaction happens in the daylight. Part of the reaction doesn't require light. So this is a light-dependent reaction. This is a light-independent reaction. But the whole process, pretty complicated string of reactions to do the simple thing of taking in water and carbon dioxide and making oxygen and sugar. All right, so we know, hopefully by now, that glucose is a product, or it is made from photosynthesis. Again, the glucose made in the chloroplast either becomes part of the plant, it becomes that fruit that we eat, or it's stored in the stems as starch, or that glucose swims right over to a mitochondria and the plant uses its own food that it made to make energy for itself. That energy is made in an organelle called mitochondria. So photosynthesis happens here. The glucose made there goes over to a mitochondria where cellular respiration happens and the usable form of energy called ATP is made. So here's the same thing. Let's look at it again. So plants take in light energy and carbon dioxide and water. It goes into the chloroplast. They do photosynthesis. They make glucose and oxygen. That glucose and oxygen goes into a mitochondria through a process called cellular respiration. And the products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide and water. So even within a plant, it can recycle its own products. It can recycle the water and carbon dioxide that it used, take in more light energy, and keep doing this over and over on its own for a while. Here's another way to look at it. Plants do photosynthesis. We eat the plants. We do cellular respiration to make energy. Plants also eat themselves and do cellular respiration to make energy. So you need to know the cellular respiration reaction. Again, it is the opposite of photosynthesis. So glucose was made in photosynthesis, oxygen was made in photosynthesis. Those are the reactants of cellular respiration to produce water. That should be CO2, sorry, carbon dioxide. A little bit of heat is made, and then this usable form of energy. Again, this cellular respiration reaction happens in animals as well as plants because every living thing needs to make ATP. What does the cellular respiration do for a living thing? So again, we take that glucose, we do cellular respiration, we make ATP. ATP is the energy for everything that keeps us alive, to help us move, to help us grow, to do reactions, to help us do both of those things. So here's a little quiz. Do consumers have chloroplast? Do you have chloroplast in your cells? No, you are not green. You do not make glucose. You don't do photosynthesis. Do producers, we know they do have chloroplast, but do they have mitochondria? That answer is yes. Plants have both. They have chloroplast to make the glucose, and they have mitochondria to turn the glucose into energy. Here's another way to look at this relationship, the whole point of the slides. We do photosynthesis. The stuff that's produced become the reactants of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration makes products which become the reactants of photosynthesis. So this cycle is a huge homeostasis system inside a plant because plants do photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Here's another way to look at it. Photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water, use light, make glucose and oxygen. That glucose and oxygen comes down here, does cellular respiration to make carbon dioxide, water, heat, and energy. So the reactants of one, these reactants are the products of the other one. Here's another interesting thing that plants do for us. We know that plants take in all of the energy from the sun, and they do photosynthesis. If you noticed in cellular respiration, one of the products is heat. And plants do this. So plants actually release a little bit of heat back to the world, but not very much. Plants absorb tons of heat. They do release a little bit, but in general, plants actually keep our world cool. Sometimes we can do cellular respiration without oxygen. So the word respiration means creating energy from glucose. Sometimes plants do that without oxygen. That actually is how alcohol is made, and it is how yeast makes bread rise. So yeast is a fungus that breaks down glucose and releases carbon dioxide. It doesn't need oxygen to do that. Here, all that carbon dioxide gas made the bread rise, and it makes it taste good. Sugar in different grains like wheat and barley and corn, those sugars can actually break down on their own and they turn into an alcohol and release carbon dioxide. And that is how we get alcoholic drinks. Your body also can do cellular respiration. So your body can get ATP out of glucose if you're also running out of oxygen. When you exercise a lot, your body won't be able to keep up. It won't be able to breathe in as much oxygen as it needs in order to make ATP. One of the byproducts of that, anaerobic is what it's called. An means without oxygen. So without oxygen, respiration is lactic acid. Lactic acid buildup in your muscles is actually what a muscle cramp is. And that is it. The main gist of this lecture was to understand the relationship of cellular respiration and photosynthesis, what organelles they happen in, and those reactions.